When I first visited Central Oregon, I witnessed something that convinced me that I wanted to move here. It was a mountain bike race whose finish line was at the 10 Barrel parking lot, but you weren't considered across the finish line until you chugged a beer. It was love at first sight. Over the years, I've come to realize that Central Oregon is about as much responsible for the mountain bike revolution as Northern California, which mainly gets most of the credit for it.
And it all started when a group of early pioneers lugged their modified beach cruisers to the top of Mount Bachelor and raced their way all the way to the bottom.
And that's really a kicking off point of, these guys who are spending their winters skiing, giving them something to do in the summertime beyond hiking.
Pretty soon, the initial pandemonium began building bonds.
So there were two groups in town that were really the instigators of this mountain biking community. One was a group called Clister's Corner. Clisters being the ski wax is kind of a throwback to how they were spending their winters. So you had Clister's Corner with Bob Woodward and a lot of his friends, and then you had the Black Rock Riders, which was really centered around Dennis Heater and his mountain biking adventures.
One of the most famous treks that is still talked about around campfires today is the day that Dennis Heater took a bunch of friends to go conquer some trails, but got handled instead.
The Black Rock Riders are on a ride. They're about 15 miles out from their car, and Big Bob totally shears off his handlebars on his bike, just snaps off. Well, Dennis Heater, being, the innovative little guy that he is, I've got a Swiss Army knife, I've got duct tape, and there's a little tree over there. And so they saw off the little limbs and fashion out of tree limbs and duct tape, a fork to be able to get him back into their rigs. And we're like, did it work? And he's like, yeah, couldn't go very fast, but it got me back to the trucks.
And while one bike out of Northern California is largely credited as the innovator, a local by the name of Brad Stankey is also credited with being way ahead of his time.
Same time frame as Fisher Bikes is coming out of Northern California, he develops what is called the Outback. And so it's Speed and Research Company, Outback bicycle designed for mountain biking.
But sadly, the $1,000 plus price tag in the early 1980s kind of cooled the market off for this bike, which is kind of ironic if you think about how expensive mountain bikes are today.
And of course, if you know what mountain bikes go for today, granted it was 1982, a different time period and price point, but he was ahead of his time in coming up with the Outback.
And while Northern California deservedly gets much of the credit, the man who wrote the book on mountain biking lives over near Aubrey Butte to this day.
His friends call him Woody, but he's also known as Art Deco and the Reverend Lester Polyester.
Bob became good friends with the Northern California folks, so the Gary Fishers and the famous mountain biking names out of Northern California. And one of Bob's claims to fame is that he literally wrote the book. Don't use that, phrase lightly. He wrote the first guide to mountain biking in the country.
And the folks that brought their dreams to life on the trails also brought to Central Oregon some life that exists to this day. Ow, ow, ow.
So there's a love affair with bicycles in this community that manifests itself in a couple of different ways. One of which is the mountain biking industry that we have today. And people move here specifically because of the mountain biking.
And it all came from an old clunker, some duct tape, and a love of adventure.
So from humble beginnings to now this multi-million-dollar industry, and ultimately it was a group of folks just having fun exploring the world around them from their bikes.
Now, I was recently given a chance to sit down with both Bob Woodward and Dennis Heater, so of course I jumped at the chance. That interview, plus a bunch of really cool stories about the early days of mountain biking in Central Oregon, are coming up. Stay tuned.
For Central Oregon Daily News, I'm Scott Elmas.